Russia's defense ministry has accused Ukraine of launching a drone attack on Moscow. Officials said the two drones were neutralized early Monday, but that the city's mayor says two non-residential buildings were hit and debris was found near the defense ministry. It's not clear if the damage to the buildings was caused by a direct hit or falling wreckage. Well, distrust in Russia's military command has become a major headache in its war on Ukraine. Ultra-nationalists have criticized the Ministry of Defense, claiming that generals are judged more for loyalty than performance on the battlefield. Recently, a number of high-level generals have been fired, or worse. A prominent hardliner who accused the Kremlin of weakness and indecision has also been detained, suggesting infighting over the conduct of the war.
Dismissed. Disappeared. Dead. Russia is losing its top generals at an alarming rate. Major General Ivan Popov, seen here on the left, commanded troops in the Zaporizhia region. He was reportedly popular with his soldiers, but then complained about conditions at the front. That got him removed from his command. A difficult situation arose with the senior leadership. I had to remain silent and faint-hearted, and to say what they wanted to hear, or call things by their names. In the name of all of our friends killed in combat, I had no right to lie. I outlined all the problems in the army in terms of combat work and support. I called everything by its name. Sergei Surovikin, in the center here, was deputy head of the forces fighting in Ukraine, and earlier was in charge of the war effort in the country. Known as General Armageddon for his brutal but effective tactics in Syria and Ukraine, he was also popular with troops and the Russian ultra-nationalist community. But Western analysts say Surovikin may have known about the armed rebellion by Wagner forces earlier this month. He made this video appeal, asking the rebels to stop. Analysts have called it a hostage video. Surovikin has not been seen in public since. A prominent Russian lawmaker has said he is resting and not available at the moment. Lieutenant General Oleg Shokov on the right here met a different fate. Russian media claims he was killed in a cruise missile strike in southern Ukraine, making him just the latest in a string of generals who have allegedly died in the war zone. Military bloggers and ultra-nationalists say this shows that the Ministry of Defense can't even protect its own generals. Last month, the Ministry of Defense's loudest critic, Evgeny Prigozhin, mounted a rebellion against the army and had his Wagner mercenary troops take over a central military headquarters. Since then, Prigozhin's whereabouts have been mysterious. His last alleged appearance is in a cryptic video said to be shot in Belarus. He seems to have survived his challenge to the army's hierarchy, but it's unclear how long he can survive and in what role. Much of the anger in the ultra-nationalist community is directed at these two men, General Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov and Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu. They have planned and executed the war from the beginning, and despite numerous failures and setbacks, are still in their jobs. As long as these senior figures escape accountability, while others are punished or perish, the cracks in the Russian military are likely to keep growing.
Well, while Russia's top brass struggles to keep things together, the lower ranks of the military are also plagued with morale issues. Russian military courts have reported more than 1,000 cases of desertion, and Western observers say soldiers fleeing military service is on the rise. Two of those men told DW why they decided to go AWOL and flee Russia.
Here in Georgia, in the capital Tbilisi, this young Russian man is living in fear. He doesn't want to tell us his real name. We call him Nikita. Until February, Nikita lived and studied in Moscow. After being called up to join the army, he decided to flee the country.
I didn't want to go to war. Escaping was my only chance. I was aware of the consequences, that I would have to hide from Russia my whole life, and I could never come back. But I just don't want to kill people.
thousands of kilometers away in Uralsk, western Kazakhstan. Igor Sanjiv wants to share his story too. When mobilization began last fall, he was supposed to report to the military, allegedly to compare personal data. However, when Igor presented himself to the office, he was ordered to go to an army training camp that same evening. Feeling trapped, Igor decided to flee.
I don't want to play this lottery called war that President Putin is running.
Igor Sanjiv calls the war against Ukraine a deadly lottery. According to media reports, it's said to have already cost the lives of tens of thousands of Russians. This information cannot be verified. Many mobilized by Putin's decree last year came from Russia's poorest regions. Some complain about poor conditions, lack of weapons and ammunition. The human rights activists from the Russian NGO Idite Lesom know of more than 1,000 lawsuits for alleged desertion. In fact, the number of deserters is said to be even greater, and the fear of further mobilization is still there, especially among those committed in peacetime, like Nikita in Georgia. He says the army funded his studies and he should now work for them for 3 years following his graduation.
I signed the contract out of stupidity. I wasn't aware of many things when I started studying at the age of 20. Okay, I thought, I'll waste 3 years in the army, but I'll get my degree for it. The financial possibilities of our population are limited. For many, mobilization and participation in hostilities is the only chance to make any money.
But now, in times of war, it's a matter of life and death. Igor and Nikita know that deserters in Russia can expect long prison sentences.
I don't feel safe in Georgia. Sometimes I have nightmares where my old boss comes knocking on the door and says, "Come on, I found you."
Igor applied for asylum in Kazakhstan, but he was rejected. He challenged the decision but failed. Now he is threatened with deportation to Russia and is under no illusions about his future.
What's waiting for me is jail or the front in Ukraine.
But Igor and Nikita want to keep resisting, to try and stay abroad as long as they can.
For more on this, let's bring in Nikolai Petrov here. He's an analyst with the German Institute for International and Security Affairs and joins us from London. Nikolai, let's talk first about apparent cracks in Russia's military leadership. We've seen a mutiny from the Wagner Group and Russian generals missing or dead. What's going on there?
First of all, I would say that it's needed not to overestimate all these clashes among military, and part of the reasons is connected with the fact that under personalist rule, in order to keep control over military corporation, it's better for the Kremlin to have unpopular leaders there. So the conflict between top military leadership and some generals is somehow controlled and managed by the Kremlin. And the Kremlin doesn't want any strong and popular generals to appear in result of the war. But nevertheless, I would say that what we've seen recently, it's only public dimension, and those conflicts between field generals and top military leadership are going on for pretty long while, since the very beginning of the war.
So that's the top brass. What about Russia's rank-and-file soldiers? Many young men have left the country to avoid conscription. Is Russia having difficulty mobilizing personnel for the war?
I would say not that much. First of all, it's not very understandable where exactly 300,000 who were reportedly mobilized are now. They've been trained, but we've not seen this huge number of, new manpower, new soldiers. But the Minister of Defense, when speaking on the eve of the mobilization, has estimated the total mobilization reserve of Russia in 25 million persons of the age which is good. It doesn't mean that all of them can be mobilized, but the real mobilization reserve is up to 2 million persons. And if to compare Russian manpower and potential number of those who can be mobilized with Ukrainian army, Russia is in much more favorable position.
How would you describe the support for the war within Russia and the confidence in the country's military leadership? Because from abroad, we see cracks, we see weaknesses, but is it intact? You're describing a very robust number of soldiers that Putin has at his disposal.
I would say that the Kremlin doesn't need mobilization of public opinion in favor of the war. What they need and what they do enjoy is passive agreement for the war to go on and lack of any serious public protests. It can change perhaps sometime in future, especially if the number of coffins will be much bigger and Russia will face certain failures at the battlefield. But so far, the Kremlin, which combines commercial approach, they are paying huge money, and it's understandable that those who are mobilized and those who are considered to be volunteers, they are paid several times more than the average salary in their region, and their families do see this as a kind of, just business deal to a certain extent.
We keep hearing from NATO countries that they will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Well, no one really knows how long it's going to take. The war could drag on for a very long time. Do you believe that Vladimir Putin has the manpower and public support necessary to stay the course on his side?
I think that Mr. Putin clearly wants the war of attrition. Because Russia is much better positioned with regard to Ukraine in case of a long war. It does have a lot of manpower. It does have certain ammunition, although it can be old-fashioned, just like military equipment. But nevertheless, Russian economy is working for the war. And I think Putin's calculation is that the West and Ukraine will get tired much faster than Russia, and Russian population is eager to keep, passive at a time when the war is going on. And so far, the Kremlin doesn't face any serious risk of public protests.
Nikolai Petrov, an analyst with the German Institute for International Security Affairs, thank you very much for your analysis.
My pleasure.
For more on this, let's bring in Gustav Kresser. He's a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations and specializes in Russia and Eastern Europe. In your assessment, how strong is Vladimir Putin's grip on power at this moment?
Well, still quite strong. He has the repressive apparatus that is loyal to him. On the critics, a lot of them come from the front lines, from the military apparatus. You had Wagner people, but they don't have a political standing in Moscow. One of the things that went missing in the coup is that what if the Wagner column would have reached Moscow? Who would have been the ally? Who would have played along with them in political Moscow, or which kind of the administrative, the civilian apparatus would have changed side to them? No one. So it was quite a futile endeavor, and that is still Putin's advantage. He is a balancer between the military side and the civilian side, and he can play all these forces against each other. He has dismantled any credible alternative to him, and I don't think that those people who criticize him now for the conduct of the war have the political capital to challenge him at home.
Now, as we heard in our report, a number of top generals, including Popov and Surovikin, have been removed from their position or their fate is unknown. Does Putin still have capable commanders that he can also trust?
Well, he has commanders. The issue is that Putin certainly values loyalty bigger than competence. And that's a problem because, first of all, competent leaders, one after the other, run into conflict with the MOD, with the general staff, with the way the war is conducted. And Putin himself seems at point in a time have personal orders to the troops what they should achieve in his own view, and his own views often don't really align with the military realities in the field. And he then regards people who tell him that as disloyal, and that is something that degrades professionalism within the Russian army, now, of course, at a much higher pace than in peacetime.
Let's briefly talk about Yevgeny Prigozhin and his Wagner group. Do you think Putin still views him as a threat to his power, and is he actually?
I don't think so at the time. Maybe Putin is plotting already Venegans, but probably will do so a bit later in the stage. So there are two things here. First, Russia has already dismantled his propaganda apparatus, his media enterprises, etc. And that limits Prigozhin's chance to get his message across in Russia, where the media landscape is highly centralized and censored. Now, the Russian military, especially for the military intelligence service, is still very much dependent on Wagner abroad, on the missions they run in Syria, in Libya, in Mali, etc. So they want to keep it, and they want to keep the structures that so far have been useful in maintaining these operations. And I think that's Prigozhin's lifeline for now. Once they have found alternatives, once they have managed to work around it, I think his future is much more in danger than it is at this point.
Now, looking at how the war is going and recent events, what do you think is or should be Vladimir Putin's biggest concern right now?
Well, his concern is, or what it should be, is sort of the possibilities to regenerate forces, to keep the maneuver forces he has at a capable level, because he's using them for his own offensives. He wants to conquer at least Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast, which is a very hard thing, but they are also heavily used as reserves to fight off Ukrainian attacks, and they're melting away, and that's a big problem for him. I just don't know how much he's aware of the problem.
Gustav Kresser there, the European Council on Foreign Relations. Many thanks for sharing your insights with us.
Thanks a lot.